more cell phones than people on the earth. What are we expecting by 2022? 9 billion cell phones coming out. But the interesting thing I want to highlight here is that this green portion shows the LTE connections. And look at the growth we are expecting for LTE connections. It is going to go on and on. 5G is this little yellow phase which is going to start in 2020.
5G is not a question of, well, is it going to happen? It's going to happen. It's going to be extremely useful, and here we are talking about it. So it's sort of interesting to see how just a few companies can be really aggressive and get things going well before the standards plans. As far as Verizon's involvement, we, as I speak, we have about a dozen trials going on right now with 5G. David mentioned fixed wireless. That's actually going to be one of the initial use cases for 5G. And what we learn from that is going to get transferred to the wireless mobile side.
For 5G, we're doing a lot to prepare for that. And I think we've got probably a little more holistic view of this than what you might have heard of before. There's a lot of discussion about extremely high-speed applications and data. At the FCC, there's been a lot of focus on the millimeter wave bands, very high frequencies where traditionally wireless companies haven't really played. But 5G is going to exist in a number of different bands and be throughout various bands.
In terms of 4G, there's been a lot of work, a lot of deployment going out that doesn't get a lot of publicity because we tend to focus on speed. And so, we've deployed LTE multicast, which doesn't increase speed, makes it more scalable. So if you think about, in a stadium environment where you've got 10,000 people trying to watch a playback, right, of a game or something. Multicast lets you do that, which even with 5G, you'd be struggling with 10, 20, 30,000 people in a dense environment. The other thing that we've deployed actually starting this March is a nationwide Internet of Things network. So it's actually sort of the opposite of what most people think of with 5G, where it's a very low speed. Think, slightly faster than your dial-up speed. But in terms of coverage, it's much better than even your standard 4G. And in terms of reliability, it's better. In terms of power consumption, it's very low power consumption. So it's useful for a lot of the things that are not human connected. So it's not good for your cell phone, but it's great for a bridge sensor, or your washing machine sensor, or any of the other billions of devices that are going to get deployed. But to your point, those are the things that 4G is doing already, that are already deployed. Carrier aggregation, I think Steve mentioned. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that 4G is doing that 5G will sort of enhance.
Well, it's good that we brought up Wi-Fi. I think we're going to have to see how Wi-Fi is going to impact the demand for some of these 5G services, as you say. A lot of these mobile numbers that you see about usage are actually, the bulk of it is really going over the Wi-Fi network, and Comcast right now has the largest Wi-Fi network in the country. I think your particular data point there, Rick, was showing pure mobile network usage. But it turns out over 60% of the data consumed on wireless devices or on mobile devices are actually going over Wi-Fi networks. And in the future, I was looking this morning at Cisco data. They're predicting by 2022, 50% of all data usage in the United States is going to be going over Wi-Fi networks. So we think Wi-Fi is an important component to the experience, the mobile device experience. Infrastructure is a hot topic within the administration and in Congress. And 5G and the deployment of wireless technologies and wireline technologies is a big part of the discussion around infrastructure. I'm not talking necessarily about the subsidies and universal service, not those things. What I'm focusing on is what are the policies of promoting the building, the literal facilities and building of these networks.
I haven't spoken to anyone who thinks of 4G as fading away over time, at least not in the foreseeable future.
We see many consumers using their smartphone as their connection to the internet. So it's important to have a good high-speed broadband connection there. I mean, it may be areas where the people don't have cable subscription in addition to the wireless subscription. So making sure that technology is out there.
do you think that 5G and this new build-out of infrastructure might give rise to, particularly because on one hand, we have technology that we're moving into artificial intelligence that's going to take away a lot of jobs that previously people have held. So I guess I would like to have some understanding as to what you think the promise of 5G and this new technology might bring.
Well, media sits at the corner of both. The history of building power for communities of color throughout our country is oftentimes the history of media creation and media ownership, but we don't talk about it. Frederick Douglass owned the North Star. Adam Clayton Powell owned the People's News. SNCC started Student Voice in Georgia. Even Jim Clyburn owned a newspaper before he ran for Congress. At this moment, our black newspapers are teetering. Talk to a black newspaper publisher, and they'll tell you they have not quite figured out how to shift from advertising in newspapers to advertising online. And we could see several of the biggest ones disappear the next month. That's how dire it is. I've had conversations. Two of them are trying to figure out how to help them, but both of them saying, we may go out of business next month. These are papers that have been out serving our people for over a century.
When you consider the ownership of radio and television properties across the country, strongest is not necessarily a word that I would use for any of the spaces that we operate in. We have to do a better job of making opportunities available and providing capital for folks to buy those stations. Having said that, if forced to pick a category where we perform best or where we participate most, I would say it would be radio in medium and small markets. In terms of the obstacles, if you will, I think everyone here would agree that access to capital would be probably number one and number two. Training and experience of the applicants would be a second hurdle, and access to viable properties would be the third from my perspective.
Is also knowledge. You have to be not only financially stable to go into the whole process, but you have to know what you're doing. I was privileged enough to be in VOT 13 program, a wonderful program of the NAB. And what I learned in that program, after being in the broadcast business for 25 years, was incredible. So, yeah, you need to look out for the resources and the money and the people, which are key. But you have to take it upon yourself to really, not depend on anybody but yourself, to know the business inside out.
The aspect of the business, meaning I control everything. Okay, yeah, I borrowed my money from somebody else, but I didn't get my money from a broadcaster. I'm not a GSA or an SSA, or I'm not a sidecar. Okay, so for me, when you look back and you say, okay, Dewan, you're the only guy out there doing that, and you got two other sidecars in America. You got Armstrong Williams, and you have Jorge Marshall, who's with Nexstar. Armstrong Williams is with Sinclair. You take a step back and you say, wait a minute, how did this happen? Okay, then when you study it, you say to yourself, okay, TV's not that old. TV's been around since 1953-ish. Color came in, I think 1956, okay? And there were three networks back then. You had NBC, CBS, ABC. You only had 150 TV markets. So if you wanted a license back in the 50s and the 60s, you had to be in the know. And I think we all know what was going on in this country in the 1950s and the 60s. Okay, it was a little different era. So you had 450 roughly TV signals or licenses being sold. They weren't adding licenses year after year after year. there was only 3 networks. So if you weren't part of that original group getting licenses for TV stations, you couldn't have a family-owned TV group. That's why right now the majority of the small market family-owned TV companies are white people. Because they were in the know back in the 50s and the 60s and they were able to get the licenses. I didn't have that privilege. I didn't have that luxury to do that. So when you study it and you look at specifically TV and you look for the reasons why African Americans don't own TV stations, I believe that's part of the reason. Unlike radio, we found a way to get radio because nobody would play our genre of music. And if we want to hear our genre of music, guess what we had to do? Figure out a way to get our own signal. So that's why you have more, and Marcellus alluded to it, that's why you have more African Americans owning radio stations than you do TV stations. So.
I got strip off barriers. In some ways, it makes it harder for new entrants to get in and buy, actually, right? So a lot of the regulations that may or may not go away may allow medium-sized owners to get bigger, big owners to get bigger, and that makes it harder, I think, for new entrants to get into the business, depending on where it is that you're looking to buy and where you're not looking to buy. But, you know, it's from a regulatory standpoint, you as a new buyer don't really have to worry about things like a large corporation does, right? We have multiple ownership concerns, we have local ownership concerns, we may have foreign ownership issues, so we have a whole slew of things that we have to worry about that you may not. However, the other issue is if you're looking for help, right, the person lending you money may be what the FCC calls attributable, and they may not be able to lend you money depending on how they're doing it. So you have to be really careful in understanding where's the money coming from, what strings are attached, do they own anything else in the market you're buying, whether it's radio, TV, do they provide the programming? So it's really, you know, something that should be simple is overly complex sometimes. So
I like to say this phrase that the desk is dusty in a digital age. So being the desk, the news desk is dusty in a digital age. And with that, what programs are you guys implementing to where the broadcaster is actually going out to connect in the community with the consumers and things like that? So what initiatives now as a journalist? Because when I was graduating, journalists were getting laid off, bloggers were taking over, so I had to create my own avenue. So being that I did that, I'm in the digital realm now. So, which is giving competition to news anchors, broadcasting. So what kind of initiatives are you guys doing right now in sparking to where it's boosting the digital media side as well to kind of intertwine both of those? So what is existing?
So that's a very interesting question.
Visibility, distribution, and revenue opportunities for those people are very scant. So do you think that as we look at ways to create, greater narratives and opportunities for equity and ownership in this ecosystem, do you see the prospect of partnering in some way with digital content creators so that you're not only feeding your audiences on the terrestrial broadcast side content they want to see, but you're also creating a different kind of pipeline for the media space?
I think we have an issue in our industry. I don't think the population is represented well within the ownership ranks. And I think that we have to push for some moves, for some changes. That way everybody can sit at the table as they should. Also, I think including minorities in the discussions of whatever major topic there is, not only in conferences that are addressed for minorities, because then we're just talking to ourselves. No, I think that we have to talk to the general market. I think we have to be part of the market and compete with the market. This is a society where money is everything. when it comes to ownership. You have to have good contacts in banks. You have to have good people that surround you. But at the same time, we need some help, and we need some space in the table.
Something has to be done, though, to incent the bigger companies to do business with women and minorities. Don't know exactly what it is, but something has to be done.
Encourage them to continually increase and talk about the importance of diversity and competition. Diversity across the board, all industries. So I suggest that for tomorrow's meetings, ask them questions individually. Talk to them about what are you doing about minority and women and new entrant ownership.